Okay, so I've invited you here to explore anger. And I am interested in how are you relating to this conversation? And if there's something that is feeling in the way of being here with me now and exploring this topic together.
Mm. I feel like there doesn't feel like anything in the way. It feels like I'm coming out of a context of doing a lot of technical work things. And so there's a kind of a landing process of dropping into just being with you in this conversation. Um, and I'm interested in talking about anger. I feel like I was just letting myself kind of simmer with it earlier in the day and just feeling how much my relationship with anger has changed. Like maybe even 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I would have described as a person who my entire life did not feel the emotion of anger. So being able to come from that and having met many other people that resonate with something of that into holding anger workshops with you feels like such a big difference. And yeah, I feel like there's a lot of things that can be explored in our relationships, but also in like everyone's relationship with anger and um, all of the emotions that are in the kind of category of anger, like irritation and frustration and activation. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm really holding a big question mark. I don't know exactly what we'll talk about, but I feel like both of us have had such journeys with it that I sense something meaningful will come up.
Yeah. I'm also holding that sense that I know there's a lot that we both have thought about here and experienced and talked about. Um and I think my intention is to imagine that like anger is kind of like a concept or like an object that we're holding in front of us and looking at together. And we're exploring what feels like familiar about it and what feels still at the edge of our thinking. Um, and this particular conversation was also, um, I guess I was motivated to reach out now because, you know, 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, we started hosting our first anger workshop. And then this week, I feel like I've been having some new experiences with anger or like um, um, new thoughts, I guess, about how I'm relating to anger as well. And I was like, okay, great. I feel like a beginner again. Feels like a really good moment to have this conversation. And yeah, and I guess I something that is maybe a little bit in the way for me is I always feel a little bit of contraction around, kind of trying to invite people into a bit more of an intentional format. And there's the recording going, and I always wonder how that impacts how people feel. And in my previous conversations, the people I've spoken to expressed that there was a bit of that fear that it evokes around, do I have enough to say? Like, is this sophisticated enough? And I guess if that's there, I want to be with that for both of us. And and that's kind of why, yeah, that's kind of why I'm starting with a bit of the like what's here now because I want us to basically just feel as comfortable as we can so we can just like relax into following our curiosity and the things that feel alive around anger.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you're naming that. I listened to a couple other conversations that you'd had and heard that named. And I was feeling that just a couple of days ago when you first invited us to talk about anger. Um, and I had some sense of like wanting to say important things. And then the way that you framed it and wanted to frame it, it just felt like, oh, this is just a recorded conversation. I do this all the time. I spend years recording every conversation I have. This is just another one. And it's going to go into a space where other people might listen to it, but I don't know who and how many uh, And I could kind of just think of it like you and I having a conversation that's recorded and will be shared probably with people who would want to listen to this kind of a conversation. So um, in my mind, it's like eager people who also want to relate with anger differently that'll hear it. And that makes it feel less pressured. Like there's not a bunch of critics trying to see whether my thinking is valid enough for their taste.
Yeah. Cool. So I think my first sort of handle into this is I'm curious what comes up for you when you think about the word anger.
I think of I have an image of like holding my fists down here and being like ah, and that's like the thing that comes up. So there's also like a sensation, like it feels more alive and vibrant, and there's also something about yelling and like a charge that I think is like when something comes up that feels uh maybe like it crosses some no somewhere, then I might have a response that comes up in my body to exert force to like, command where the boundary is that's okay. And that's kind of what I experience anger as. It's kind of like a generative force that comes up in service of something. Um, And also, I think that's like the initial sense. And then there's also like stories around anger that feel like I know a lot of men that experience anger and are kind of afraid of their own anger because of many like people feeling, especially if they're in bigger bodies, many people feeling unsafe when they're feeling it. So there's also a sense of like it's powerful and thus wielding and being in it requires a certain amount of responsibility and care and awareness.
Yeah.
That's the initial thing that comes up. I wonder what comes up for you.
Yeah. I'm also curious about that actually. Hmm. Yeah, there's a bit of like a bigness that I feel around this topic. There's a sense that I don't know, there's like an emptiness that I have felt around it for many years. Um, like it just wasn't really very much on my mind. And and then in the past 2 years, it has been uh, almost like an explicit goal. Um, like the thing you're supposed to do is to get more angry. I think has been a bit of a sense in me, um, which which I think was a natural like consequence of realizing that I don't even know like how it feels like to be angry. And the only thing that I remembered was that once with my ex-partner, I just had this explosion that felt really out of control. And it made me feel a bit like I just like embodied some outside person. And then when it was over, I like looked back and I was like, who was that person who just got so angry? I feel like I wasn't able to like map it onto my identity. Like, where did this come from? And and then I sort of, left it for another 2 or 3 years, and I haven't really explored that much. And then I went to some anger workshops, and um, yeah, and I was like, oh wow, maybe this is like an energy that lives in me, and it wants to move. And I think that is kind of how I'm holding it now as well. There's a sense of like it's an energy. Um, it's like a force, and it is a resource at my disposal. Um, Yeah. And then nearby is the word rage, which
Mhm.
feels very different. I think I almost don't like it. Um, so that's also coming up. Like how are they different? Like what's anger? What's rage? Um,
Yeah, I'm really curious what rage means to you.
I think it feels like the unwholesome version. It
Mm.
feels like that out of control thing that is aimed at destroying usually someone. Um,
Mhm.
and and then I'm also remembering there was some podcast I listened to once where they distinguished between rage and white rage, and they were like, white rage is the unwholesome one, and then rage is fine. But I guess like unless it's directed at someone intentionally to hurt them. Um, so yeah, I guess this reminds me of a quote I was reading recently from Harriet Lerner from The Dance of Anger, where she speaks like specifically about anger, if held well, is a tool for self-discovery more than something that's directed outwards at others, which I guess is the traditional way that we see it in society, and that's why we don't want to do it. But yeah, there's something about this like tool for self-discovery, for finding out what I actually care about, and when something uh, negative is happening to me, like can I even recognize that something bad is happening to me? And if I do, can I use that tool to protect my home? Um, yeah, I guess I'll pause here.
Yeah, I had a lot of thoughts that came up. Um, when you were talking about anger as an energy, I was thinking about a somatic teacher I follow, Luis Mojica, talks about different kinds of somatic activation as a charge. And almost he used this image of like the energy coming in almost like a divine force. Like it's this intense energy and it's moving through the body. And there's almost like a stewardship. There's like a role that we're in, like okay, intense energy, and my job is to move it, which unhealthy might be unconscious direction at a person, but healthy might be like, I need to go shake, I need to go stomp and like be with this. Or maybe maybe there's actually like some signal of a no that needs to be said, or a boundary or something that needs to happen. And it's interesting because I feel like anger can be such a huge spectrum, from like minor irritation in a moment that I might respond to with like patience and pausing and then sensing like, is there something I need to change in my environment, to like maybe rage is part of one side of the spectrum, or just like very very intense heated charge that's like you were talking about, could almost click in a different mode of awareness. And yeah, I was thinking about rage because I guess I have like a handful of experiences, maybe less, with what I would describe as rage. And when you first brought it up, what I thought was just a time where someone reflected back to me that they saw rage, which was during a women's circle where there was drumming and singing, and we were going around the circle talking about what we wanted to let go of. And words didn't come to me. And the elder that was leading the ceremony just said, just like, just let out sound. And I just started yelling, like grungy, like, oh, and but deep and loud. And women after were just saying like that was like pure rage, the like essence of it. And so my relationship with it is like, oh, it almost feels like I was just channeling something, which is maybe part of where the out of control part comes from. But it felt to me like I was feeling rage on behalf of generations of people. And we were talking about our own ancestral lineage. So I associate it with my own ancestry, but I also associate it with like humans and women and people in situations where we can't speak for whatever reason, it would be unsafe. And so there was this rage about that. There was like a rage of humanity for the suppression of the voice. Um, and it wasn't at anyone. It wasn't like trying to change something, but it was like mourning, and it was like a wail, but it was also this like heat of like I'm breaking that chain. I'm not going to continue that. I'm going to do something different. So there was that self-transformation aspect. But I think it was also a like what's going on in the world around me that's participating in this thing that this rage wants to um, burn away in some sense. And could I do that in a wise way? Could I participate in something changing wisely and with patience? Like, I almost think anger and patience don't need to be opposites. If I'm patient and I'm holding the anger, then I have like a white hot flame that I can consciously direct towards, like, hey, let's do something different here. Which is very different than like reacting to what's going on in front of me that matches a pattern that's the thing that the rage is about. So I feel like there's some wise way of wielding rage if we're able to stay with the intensity of the sensation that could be there and the like patience of what's happening in front of us or within us.
Hmm. Yeah, there's a couple of things also that this is stirring up in me. And one of them is just like I really like this idea that maybe anger and rage are sort of on the spectrum of the same thing, but maybe there are situations that just require rage level. Like yeah, dealing with some sort of collective rage that you're experiencing that um I don't know, just the size of it maybe is why it escalates to that level of charge.
Yeah.
Um and yeah, and then the other thing is that um what you said about patience, that brought up the thing that I was exploring this week, which is that, and I guess I'm gonna have to find words for it because I haven't really said it out loud. But I think there's been a way in which attending these workshops where we really are encouraged to express, to like make sounds, move our body in big ways, punch things. Um, this has just like felt so good and so cathartic to be able to do that after, many, many years of feeling like that's not even allowed or available. Um, but I think maybe because of how strong that experience is, I have come to see that as um, almost as if it's like anger always looks like this.
Mm.
Um, and And I realized that maybe there's a part of me, the one that feels like it has been silenced, who who actually needs that, who actually needs to just like make almost like a show and be witnessed, to just tell to the world, like, here I am, I can do this. See that. Um, but I think I've gotten a bit wary that maybe this has become my um only experience or model of anger. And um like it's interesting you mentioned Luis Mojica, and he's concerned with like nervous system regulation, right? And somatic stuff. And I've been taking part in this nervous system course with Johnny Miller this past month. And in it, we also had a module on um, like releasing our emotions and holding intensity that's emotional in our body. And and he said that there's research that shows that emotions, when they are just allowed to come and pass, they last something like 10 to 20 seconds.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, interesting. I guess maybe sometimes my anger could just arise and I could like let it sort of move and pass within 20 seconds. Maybe I don't need to like hold myself a ceremony with pillows and drums every time that I get angry. Because in some sense, it will actually make me release my anger less and hold on to it more. Um,
Mhm.
Rather than just be able to like have it come up and move in like micro ways throughout my days. Um, and I don't know, that like really affected me because I'm like, yeah, I think I've been almost a little bit like how to say it, like blinded by the intensity of these anger releases, where I was like, well, it's just got to be like that now. If I want to work with my anger, I got to do a whole 1 hour thing. And I'm like, well, these have their place. And also, there's like an everyday uh, sort of anger cleaning that I want to
Yeah.
be able to do.
Yeah. That makes me think of someone in the local community here that does anger release workshops. When she sets them up, she talks about she has this term called current. And she said that some people are like emotionally current, like they're not holding tension in their bodies that are from like childhood levels of chronic tension from emotions. They've like, you know, done the ceremonies that really like heat the body up and move things, and then learn to hold their body in a way that's not holding that kind of tension or chronically being in that emotion. And then what's needed from that place is just the regular like pass throughs of emotion as they come. And so maybe the purpose of the ceremonies are more about moving through stuff that's been stuck for a while. Or even if we start to feel anger and there's like resistance to feeling it, like we feel like we shouldn't feel it, or we have to stop ourselves or protect or get through it, or like all those things that come up actually like uh, make the process a little bit more complex and take longer to actually move the emotion just naturally. But if there is something that's just like acceptable by us, like we have an inner allowance for it, I think that 20-second thing is totally possible. I was even just thinking of times where I'm like, I'll feel a little bit of frustration, even if I'm out walking or something, and I'll just like, and then it feels like gone. It only takes like
Yeah.
5 seconds of making, like being willing to make a funny face and like make some sound and shake my body up. And as long as that willingness is there, it can move. And I wonder if part of why things get stuck is because a lot of us are in context, especially if we have like service jobs or some kind of other like context that requires us to be in a certain expectable mode of human being while we're moving through our day, such that making a funny face and sound and shaking isn't acceptable in some way.
Yeah, totally. I resonate with that. And 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 I was also just thinking how funny it is that in some sense I'm saying that for many years I was living in some kind of a belief that, anger is bad, that I shouldn't be angry. So that was like one kind of prison of sorts. And maybe now I have like put myself in a new kind of prison, which is like, well, you can only release anger in the ceremonies. Um, and now I'm like, well, okay, and maybe also sometimes I can do what you just described, or perhaps I can just like lie down and like let it flood me for a few seconds and then move on. Um, and I don't know, something about that um feels important and kind of opening in some way. And um yeah, and I guess I sort of wanted to explore that as well because I got a bit concerned that I could perhaps perpetuate some of that thing in the context where I'm trying to speak to other women about anger or hold ceremony, where I kind of want to hold the ceremony in the right relationship to
Yeah.
the like more universal experience of anger that's more accessible.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe there's even like different, like laying and just feeling the charge. Maybe that's sometimes all that's needed. I wonder if there's something about like holding anger as having a message. And it's almost like if we're able to listen and tune in and we've like learned the language of anger, then anger might come up and I might feel like, oh, I'm I like booked too many calls this week and I actually just need to cancel them or something. Like I can tell that there's something going on that my system is signaling to me through a charge. Um, and that it would be in circumstances that I can't quite hear what it is, or I don't want to hear it, or I'm not listening to it, that it like gets louder and louder and more intense. Um, and then feels bigger. Or even if I get a signal like, oh, I need to say no to something, but then some other experience in me comes up and goes, oh, I can't say no. Or there's some reason that the thing that I actually need is blocked from me. or the thing that I think somebody else is needing is blocked for them. Like there's some kind of block to what I actually think is just the appropriate circumstance. And then it's like the charge comes more intensely with a force that is needing it, with like a harder block.
Yeah. What's something you got angry about recently?
Well, I think I felt angry actually with receiving messages. I was feeling in part of my like luteal menstrual phase, and this sense of like a sensitivity to intaking more complexity in relationship things. And I just let myself actually with my phone just be like, no, I'm not looking at you. And it was just like multiple times where I would just see these messages pop up and I just like charge my anger into a no at the messages, and then it would be gone. It would just feel like, oh, okay, well, I'm not gonna look at this. I'll wait until I don't feel a no.
I love that. I've not tried this one before.
Yeah.
A
I
no
feel
to
like there's
complexity.
some willingness to be silly. Like I feel like I
Yeah,
really let myself be like, mm-mm. Like it can feel like childish or something, but at the same time, when I do it, it just passes, and I don't feel the like stuckness
yeah,
anymore.
yeah. It's like silly on one hand, and I've also found that something that was confronting for me was that I guess what the anger was nudging me towards when I was in it was sort of making really ugly, scary faces, almost like trying to deter someone, right?
Uh-huh.
And yeah, and I noticed how much of a barrier to feeling the feelings is also in my face. How much like my face has become this like reinforcement of that belief that I should behave and I should like, be nice to people and not trigger them and not hurt them. And I was surprised to notice that when I see it in my body, it's like the expression channels are my hands often. Um, and and one place where things were really blocked was my face, and it took like many releases to even like dare to make that like ugly face, and just
Yeah.
and then when I was doing it, I still could see the like almost in parallel as I'm doing it and I'm really enjoying it on the somatic level, like it feels very juicy. At the same time, there's this running thought of like, who are you now? Like, who does this? And
Mm.
almost sensing into like mother/society voice in there. That was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's very interesting to me. I wonder about like there's the who are you now that could be parallel to your experience of feeling anger and not knowing like who it was that was feeling that anger, like a different person. But then there's also something about like shame or judgment, like a shouldn't do that. And I'm curious about the nuances of that inner experience that comes up for you.
Hmm. I don't know if I fully understand the question yet.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering, I guess I could have pictured there being multiple things that are part of that voice that comes up that's like, who are you? Like, who does this? Um, and I wonder like what the predominant feelings are behind it.
Hmm. Yeah, this is quite interesting because I mean, there's definitely something like shoulds and shouldn'ts. Um, yeah, but I think maybe the feelings, maybe it's actually fear. I mean, there's definitely shame. And then there's, I think, fear of things getting out of control or some kind of a sense that if I am this kind of a person now who does these things that I never used to do, like what else should I get ready for? Or like
Mm.
what else is there that is going to come out? Um, so there's almost that sense that it's opening a Pandora's box and I'm going to lose control and,
Mm.
in the worst case scenario, be labeled as mental person.
Yeah. Yeah, that initially makes me think of almost like an identity shift. Like like if I identify with not feeling anger or not feeling intense emotions that make me almost feel like wild, like I'm a civilized person and there's an identity there, then getting wild and funny and putting mud on my face and like whatever could feel like, oh, I'm now breaking this mold of this societal person that I expect myself to be. But then I wonder about that, like out of control, like that there's one thing about identity, but then there's another thing about fear. Like, can I trust this? Could I feel wild and not lose myself or not lose my like inner discernment and knowing? Or will it just take me over and I'll end up unknown to myself?
Yes. And that also reminds me of my experience with sadness and with grief. Um, there was like a similar fear there of like losing myself in it, or like it will never end, or we don't know where the limit of this is. Um, but in this case, it was less about the wild, but more about just like some sort of black hole that will suck me in and I will never come out. Um,
Mm.
and and the way that I have like come to hold this now is I I think there are those parts of me who know that they have a lot of unfelt old things to feel. And I think that prediction that it will be a lot and it will be long and deep, that is coming from them. Um,
Yeah.
but the sort of experience itself often just feels like intense, but it comes and it passes, right? And uh, it is not scary in itself. It's just that there's that prediction, almost seems like associated with, oh yeah, I have not like felt this particular feeling in a long time. So therefore, there's probably going to be a lot of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it also makes a lot of sense to me. I have a similar kind of experience that for things that I spent many years not looking at, I would have an ingrained belief of like it's too much for me. Like when we're a child and there's a sensation that's just too much and we just take space from it because we actually don't have the capacity to metabolize it. And then if we grow up through many years associating a certain sensation or even a certain like flavor of sadness, like a lot of sadness just comes through me, but some sadness that's like more despair shaped, I feel a little bit more protection from because I spent years in depression. Like I didn't know how to metabolize the despair. And so now when it comes up, there's like a familiar aversion to like, I don't like this thing and I don't really want to feel it fully. And it kind of feels like it might be intense and black hole-ish. But generally, when I feel it, I actually do have the capacity to move it. It's just like a habitual association with it being too much that I've learned.
Yeah. And and I guess there's also a thing where um it could be that we've internalized some messages from society about it being too much. But I guess it could also be that there was a time when it was too much and we didn't have support around us. Um, because for some feelings like anger or rage or deep grief, like you kind of need a bigger body to help you hold it. And if there wasn't one, then maybe it was just actually too much.
Yeah. Yeah, or even not like there's a bigger body when we're a kid, but there's also like a societal space for it. Like the grief ceremony that you've
Yeah.
described to me before. If I feel a lot of grief and I'm just walking through my day, going to jobs and maybe coming home to my roommates, and I'm just thinking like, I'm just participating as a normal human, I might not just feel up to wail and to just like totally break into the fullness of the grief that wants to move through. And I feel like we need spaces for that. We need some kind of space, whether it's with ourselves because we're used familiar enough and comfortable enough to just allow ourselves to go there, or with other people, especially if we're not familiar with the bigness of the emotion, and it just feels safer to know that you're grounded because you're surrounded by community. So you won't
Yeah,
lose
for sure.
yourself by going really deep.
Yeah. Yeah, and that I guess is another reason why these ceremonies feel so potent, because you actually get to, in an embodied way, experience that reality where you don't need to hide it. You don't need to be alone with it. In fact, you will see other people do it with you and you will be encouraged to do so. And I feel like that is an experience that like really flips that uh, predominant belief on its head. And it just like I think the first time that I experienced it, I was like both left in like kind of deep sense or like deep rightness of what I experienced and deep confusion of like, wait, what? Like this is okay? Like so why are we not doing this more? And I guess I still feel a little bit of anger arising here as you talk about it. And there's this desire in me to understand better how we have come to be where we are, where this is so niche and so new.
Yeah. Yeah, which really makes me think. I mean, I have a story and narrative that humanity hasn't learned emotional maturity yet as like a whole. And that for many, many years, if anger came up in someone, I mean, people murder other people. Like that's a real thing. Sometimes anger comes up and there is like a total cloudedness of awareness and people just act in ways that they might otherwise not act. And my sense is that there's just a lot of immaturity about people's relationship with emotion, such that as a society we've protected ourselves from that by saying that's off limits. Like really intense anger, we don't want really intense emotions at all. We don't know how to be with, and so we push it to the outskirts and to the taboos. And then when I hold that story, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. And I think we're in the middle of the evolution of that story. We're changing it, and part of it is these small niches that we build up where we can do something different together.
I've also been
Yeah.
feeling this way, and I don't know, I might be biased just because I've been interested in this topic myself, but it does seem to me like wherever I go, there's quite a lot of appetite to talk about this. And um, I actually just learned that the anger movie that I took part in last year, did I tell you about that? It was called Love Your
No.
Rage, and it was like a short film that my friend initiated. And we did some fundraising for it, and we did some shooting, and it's basically like a movie that shows like a more, I guess, like artistic vision for anger release in women specifically. And the goal was to like shift the narrative a bit to show that it can be a beautiful process that leads to a lot of insight and love and clarity. Um, and I was like one of the volunteers in it. So we basically did this thing with like everyone got 15-minute blocks and you could pick your own music and you just like went into your process. And that was shot and then compiled into like a series of women expressing their anger. And we just found out that that the film got like won the best women film in the festival like Cannes. And I'm like, wow, okay, so I guess there's also like an appetite in society, hopefully, to like talk about this. And I'm kind of excited about, yeah, what that might lead to. But yeah, I have a feeling like it's not just the film. I think it's also the message. And yeah, I don't know. I share that sense that there's something going on, that there's something on the way.
Yeah, that's so exciting. Yeah, I feel I'm really thinking of men and women and maybe even different journeys with anger because I think there's a lot. at least a lot of women that I know that have kind of been brought up into humanity, humanhood, feeling like being nice and polite and fitting and adaptable and approachable is like the story that we've inherited to be. And so there's almost something about anger that's like breaking free of that narrative and allowing a little bit more wildness, but we could also say like humanity, more fullness of our experience to come through. And I also know a lot of men that I know some men that have struggled with anger to the point that even have like lost their voice from chronic tension being held in the throat from not speaking, or other funky body things going on. But also the anger that has come through that has had like a very strong negative impact on other people around them, and then that almost leading to like a recoil of like, I can't let this out, I have to force it down in some way. And so there's almost something, there tends to be something for women that's kind of like, if I be with the anger, I'm like not acceptable. And for men, if I be with the anger, I'm scary. And I think that that's for both. There can be a sense of, for me anyway, like a fear of intimidating, a fear of like having an impact that rebounds. But I'm really just with this like craving for so many people for more of ourselves, for more of our experience. And maybe there's something about learning how to be with anger in a way that we trust, in a way that there's non-naive trust in us, that we're going to stay connected to ourselves, to our discernment, to our clarity while we're with the emotion, that allows us to not fear it anymore and to be able to just express it.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that as a bigger story about people wanting to come into more authenticity. Because it's not just anger. There's just like some emotions that are intense and they are a little bit forbidden. And anger is just one of them. Um,
Even
yeah, like in my
ecstasy is.
exploration, right. I was just thinking about that because in my like experience, I found it equally hard, if not even harder, to really fully feel positive emotions as the negative ones or as the like, yeah, kind of charged ones. Which ecstasy or excitement even and celebration, joy, those are equally hard to like really embody and fully feel in my experience.
Maybe there is something, maybe there's a pattern across all of these that is like intensity might, like if we just channel some very large emotion through us, we might show up differently than how we would predict ourselves to show up or how other people would predict us to show up. And there's like an unsafety in that, in the difference that intense emotion brings. Which, yeah, really makes me think about like, I talk a lot about the meta, and it's like I'm meta witnessing. And maybe meditation is another form of this, like developing the witness role inside means that I can fully feel something really intense and never lose touch with the witness. And I think that there's a bad rep in some spaces that the meta is almost a distance from the emotion. And there's something that I feel, maybe witness is a better word, where I could stay in touch with some kind of awareness that's just aware of my context and me and the emotion moving. It's almost like IFS talks about the self. It's like there's an inner parent that's like, I'm aware, I'm gonna like move this date. You're like hitting a pillow, and there's something that you might knock. I'm gonna set it aside. And then you can keep hitting the pillow. There's like a caretaker function, or the witness that's just aware of something broader and isn't just super zeroed into the intensity of the emotion. Which can be hard when emotions are really intense. There's like this attentional draw into the narrow slit of focus with them. And so maybe there's some development of some kind of capacity that meditation could be one tool for, but maybe there's others of having a broad focus while also having a narrow like focus. Somehow they're not incompatible. Like both could be held.
I love that because it's like almost like next level stuff. And it reminds me of that thing we talked about when we were designing our workshop with like really wanting to like sort of like the main message to be like move at the pace of your body and at the pace of your nervous system. And it almost feels like if you can be in that sort of neutral place, um, where you can, I guess, have that discernment of like how far does it actually want to go? Like how intense is actually the sensation? And does it feel good in my body or not? Um, yeah, that feels like different than when I guess I'm thinking like, oh, anger looks a certain way, I need to scream. Or or I'm angry at myself, like why can't I scream? Let me scream, right? Or there's that sense of like um yeah, some kind of like parts that feel like they haven't had enough space to express themselves and now it's their only chance to express themselves, so we're going to go full out. Um which could be a genuine sensation, right? Like sometimes, but I just feel like the like next level with anger is developing that witness or that self or that holding capacity where you can discern like where does the sensation want to go, rather than where do you feel like you should go, to do it right.
Yeah. And I think that's also why in our anger workshop we brought in the pauses between the intense songs of checking back in and coming back to stillness and going, what does feel right for this moment? Do I want to keep doing that intensity? Do I actually need something else? And maybe that's part of the development is like having pause points where we kind of zoom back out. If we were like totally into something, we have the zoom back out, and it like I think of almost like building white matter in the brain between two parts that don't often speak to each other, like the narrowed part and the broad part, and just pause points as points to build further communication.
Yeah, yeah. And like as we're talking about this, I'm also kind of like aware that I think we're both, it seems like we both had this experience of not really expressing anger and then coming into expressing it, coming into relationship with it. But I've also like heard from people who have the opposite problem, right? Where they have always overexpressed their anger, where they had a short fuse and they have destroyed their relationships because they just like erupted at people a lot. And yeah, and it's really interesting how there, what seems to be happening there is like you're out of control with your anger. And on the other hand of the spectrum, it's like you're almost in too much control of being able to stop your anger from coming out. Um,
Mhm.
and I'm kind of wondering, how is the journey for people who have a short fuse different from the journey that we've had of sort of like, you know, daring ourselves to like lean in and express? How is that work different or that progression different for people who struggle with being out of control with anger in their day-to-day lives?
Hmm. Yeah, I wonder about that too. I have like theories, but because I haven't lived that journey, I don't actually know what it would be like. But I know that at least in people that I've spoken to about that the having too much emotion kind of experience, and maybe different people experience that with different emotions, like not having a mechanism that stops it. Um, that there's like there's not a difficulty of getting in touch with it. Like with anger for many years, I'd be like, I don't know where anger is. I've never felt it.
Yeah,
I don't even know what it's like. And they're like, I know it. I'm like familiar with the experience. And maybe there's some, yeah, I guess it is just that that maybe Viktor Frankl quote of the moment of pause between stimulus and response as this place of freedom. Like maybe there's just more noticing, something about building a quality of awareness that comes in those moments where otherwise it would just move right through into the scene around us, but a kind of like pause point that I guess brings in a moment of discernment. It brings in choice. And I wonder, yeah, how does that get built in experiences where I've just reacted to things rather than paused and respond. A lot of how it gets built is that I do react, it creates impact, and then me and whoever else I'm talking with reflect on it. And I like build awareness after the fact of like, oh, that was going on in me 5 minutes ago. I didn't notice it until something already came out. Um, so I feel like it's a messy process. Probably the learning comes afterwards many times until I start noticing the cues that give me the awareness that something's present for me before I actually act on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of how when we were shooting that film, we sort of had like a week where every day we would gather and do a little bit of anger release together. And that was the only time that I've had such a like accumulation of anger releases in one short period of time. And I just noticed that, well, there were kind of two kinds of effects. One was a little bit more concerning, and one was positive. The positive one was that I noticed the next week I was just able to almost like notice the that energy coming up, where I think before I just didn't feel sensitive to that until it was too late, or until I got like very kind of like resentful or shut down. And here I was like, oh, I think this is like an inkling of anger. And that felt interesting. But then on the other hand, I also had like very intense nightmares that week where I would just
Mm.
like wake up with a lot of intensity coursing through my body at night. And I guess my story is that maybe like doing a lot of these releases every day was just a bit like a lot, and it opened up a bunch of things that have not really been touched for a while. Um,
Yeah.
so I guess so yeah, so I guess it also made me think about the like what's like a safe way to explore anger, and maybe just like diving really intense for a short period of time is not exactly the way to do it. Or at least to be aware that it could like disorient perhaps, or just uproot a little bit of what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, stir up some things.
That makes me think of two things. One is that I went to a contact improvisation weekend intensive, and in it we had a dance that we performed to like public people came in and bought tickets, but we'd done a lot of like learning and practicing together. And in that there was some storyline, and I was playing a woman that got raped. And in the dance, there was a point at which I like stop and just yell, and it's like everything kind of stops and it's just really intense for a moment, and then it kind of continues. And it was like we practiced a bunch and then we performed this. And on the other side of it, I was just feeling really uncomfortable. And I mean, everything went well. And I was just like, my body was uncomfortable. And I talked with someone he actually is a person that teaches parents how to parent. He's very emotionally attuned. And he was like, well, you've just put your body through a lot. You shaped the sensation of like danger over and over and over, and you told your nervous system something's not okay. So even though you're cognitively feeling like everything's fine, your body is still not. And there's almost something that needs to move, that yelling isn't the movement of. Like I almost think when there's like a block, sometimes intensity opens the block and lets something flow. But other times when there's intensity, I feel like what actually needs to happen is grounding. I'm thinking of a working out, and how if I do a really intense workout and then I immediately just hop off the mat and continue with my day, there's still a lot of charge in my body. But if I take time, like how a lot of yoga classes do, going into shavasana or going into some kind of like slower movement, like a run, you kind of go into a walk after. There's a progression of letting the body slow down that actually allows me to be back at baseline when I'm on the other side of it. And so I'm thinking of that similar with anger. Like it's not just about moving things, but it's also about the reconnection from intense sensation back to groundedness, that if it's cut off, would just leaves sensation there in the body.
Yeah, I've had that too. That was not great. And also, I'm just like mind blown by what you just said about working out hard and then just getting on. immediately because it just like I've just had this so many times when I felt like working out made me feel worse, and I just never connected the dots, but it makes so much sense now. Um, because actually just like running and working out is one of the most like organic ways to release emotions, although I guess we don't often see it that way. Um, but I'm like, okay, now it makes more sense. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, there's a whole process of the emotional like metabolization and release and return that has multiple parts of it that probably we need to attend to all of them. The
yeah,
slowness at the end.
yeah,
I'm aware we're coming near
yeah.
the top of an hour, and I wonder if there's anything you're sitting with wanting to close with, or if either of us have anything.
Yes, I was actually just sitting with the same question. Like one thing that I'm thinking about is like what is like where's my edge with anger now? Um, and I sort of have some curiosity about asking you that question too. But I think for me, it really feels like how to sort of get angry in the right way with people who are close to me, where there are things at stake. Because sometimes it feels really like bringing a little bit of anger, like well held, sometimes it's necessary, it seems. And and I've just been doing a lot of like intentional releases where we go close ourselves in a space and we do that there. So there's no relationships that are present there. And then I've also done this thing where anger has come up in my relationship. And then I was like, okay, I need to go away and do my anger thing over
Mm.
there. Um, and now I'm like, okay, seems like the next step is to actually somehow be able to have that witness, have that holding, and just bring the like right amount of it so that I don't perpetuate the story that anger is something that cannot come out with people and I should hide it, even if it means doing some sort of like intentional release around it. So that's kind of what I'm sitting with, how to do that.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes me think of, well, having learning partners, having people that sign up that say like, yes, I hear your learning edge there and I want to participate in it is very helpful. Or
Yeah,
like I have other friends who I know there's like a fiery quality to them, and if I feel the fire and allow it to like really be there, that they'll like meet me in it rather than kind of shy away from it.
yeah,
Yeah. And it also makes me think about this word that my partner and I use is like discharging. And there's a way that almost like if I feel something intense and I we're kind of using it as like an unconscious thing. I discharge it out of my body because it's too much sensation for me to hold on to another person. And it's almost like even just a slight tone that I use that's like, well, you did this or something. There's like a huh, you take this energy and ball and have it over here. And there's a way that that is like unconscious and it's like trying to release something, but it's not doing it in a way that's like, I'm holding this energy here. I'm holding this interaction. Um, and I think that there's something different about almost like that wise discernment of like a very clean cut of something. There's like a something here, like there's a heat, and there's like the heat comes into like something here doesn't feel good for me. But the communication isn't onto, it's like into, it's like allowing more heat into the cooking process that lets something metabolize.
yeah. Yeah, and what you're sharing is making me think that maybe one way to go about it is also to just like stay in the frame of what I'm experiencing. Um, because I guess when blame gets mixed into that, it gets also harder. But if I can just say, wow, I'm really not enjoying what is happening here, or it feels like my boundaries are being crossed, or it feels like I don't want to be around this thing right now. I guess it feels like more accessible if I imagine that as just a statement of like what I'm noticing is happening to me, that is evoking the anger.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe that's even like a tool to use those kinds of statements until you experience yourself consciously wielding anger a lot. And then maybe your kind of palette opens up to many different kinds of statements that aren't necessarily
Mm.
in blame structures, but could be like, my body felt I think ownership language is very helpful, so it always comes up for me. But I think there's like a wider range that might become accessible once
Yes.
there's like a self-trust of how to wield
Yes.
the energy.
Yeah. And I guess it reminds me of the thing we started with, which is that idea that anger is a tool for self-discovery. And if I have enough wherewithal to notice anger and be curious about it, be like, like what can I learn about myself here? Because of this anger that's arising. That I don't know, that feels like another um possibility to have a bit of that like witness next to the anger.
I feel excited about our journeys of development of this.
Yeah. I almost feel like there's something to map out here. Like the other day, I was talking to a friend and he was, saying that he's been working on anger and he feels like he's now completed the level one. And I'm like, what is level one? But it feels like there is some kind of a progression here that would be interesting to map out almost.
Yeah, and maybe there's even something beyond our current conceptions.
Right.
Maybe there's a level N that we can't even see yet.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to continue learning with you.
Yeah, yeah, maybe one day we'll feel anger with each other.
Right? Probably. And that will be a pretty big next level up.
Yeah,
Yeah, the ultimate test for our anger skills. Yeah. Well, thank you. I imagine I'm going to like link the link to our next workshop somewhere with this video.
yeah. I got a bunch of ideas that I'll share with you after about different ways that we can do things in the workshop.
Cool. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too.